Homeless girl begs Johnny Depp for help. He notices something important and takes action. Between the towering glass monoliths of downtown, Johnny Depp stepped out of the grand entrance of a luxury hotel. The air buzzed with the urban symphony. Distant car horns, the chatter of passers-by, and the faint rumble of construction echoing from a few blocks away. Dressed in his signature eclectic style, sunglasses perched on his nose, Johnny made his way toward the sleek black limousine waiting at the curb. His chauffeur, a tall man in his 50s named Thomas, stood at attention, opening the rear door with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, Mr. Depp," Thomas greeted with a polite nod. "I trust you had a pleasant stay?" Johnny returned the smile warmly. "Morning, Thomas. It was fine, thanks. Looking forward to getting back home, though. But we've got one more stop. There's a photo shoot scheduled." As Johnny was about to slide into the plush leather interior, a small figure darted past him with surprising speed. Before he could fully register what was happening, something latched onto his leg. Looking down, he saw a little girl, completely bald, clinging to him tightly. Her small body trembled, and her wide eyes stayed fixed on something in the distance, avoiding his gaze. Caught off guard, Johnny crouched slightly and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to catch her eye. "Are you all right?" Before the girl could respond, an angry shout cut through the air. Her grip on Johnny's leg tightened briefly, then she abruptly let go and fled, disappearing into the bustling crowd. A red-faced man in his 40s, wearing an apron emblazoned with the logo of a nearby convenience store, stormed toward Johnny. His eyes were still fixed on the direction the girl had run, not yet noticing who he was addressing. "That little brat," the man spat, his words laced with bitterness. "She's always hanging around my store, scaring off customers. Nothing but bad luck, I tell you." Johnny raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Has she done anything wrong? Stolen something?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. The man, caught up in his rant, shook his head. "No, she doesn't steal. She just loiters. Strolls through the aisles, touching everything but never buying. It's unsettling. My regulars don't like it, and neither do I. I think she's biding her time until she gets the chance to steal something." Mid-sentence, the man finally registered who he was speaking to. His eyes widened in recognition, and his anger evaporated, replaced by awe. "Oh my God," he stammered, his cheeks flushing. You're Johnny Depp. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize." Johnny held up a hand, silencing the flustered apologies. "It's all right," he said, his tone measured. "But let me ask you again. Has she ever actually broken anything or disrupted your store?" The store owner shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting away. "Well, no," he admitted reluctantly. "But she's always there." "It's not right." Johnny nodded thoughtfully. "You know," he said, his voice taking on a gentle, philosophical tone, "I've learned it's unwise to judge people for crimes they haven't committed. Maybe there's more to her story than you realize." Without another word, Johnny climbed into the limousine. Thomas shut the door behind him, muffling the store owner's muttered retort, "Celebrities never care about what's really going on in the world." As the limousine pulled into the flow of traffic, Johnny leaned back in his seat, his mind lingering on the strange encounter. The girl's frightened eyes and the misplaced anger of the store owner stayed with him. After a few moments, Johnny leaned forward, addressing Thomas. "Could you drive a bit slower? I need to keep an eye out for something." Thomas glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Of course, Mr. Depp. Is everything all right?" Johnny scanned the streets through the tinted window, his sharp eyes searching. "I'm not sure," he said, brow furrowed. "There was a child back there. She looked about 9 or 10 bald. I need to make sure she's okay. Help me look for her." "Certainly, sir," Thomas replied, his voice steady and reassuring. The limousine slowed, and the cityscape passed by at a leisurely pace. Bustling sidewalks teemed with commuters, street vendors set up their carts, and tourists explored the urban sprawl. Johnny's gaze darted from face to face, scanning for the small, bald figure. Just as he was about to give up hope, he spotted her, a familiar figure huddled against the wall outside another convenience store. "Thomas," Johnny said urgently. "Pull over here." The limousine came to a smooth stop. Johnny stepped out onto the sidewalk, his sunglasses shielding him from curious gazes. He approached the girl cautiously, not wanting to startle her. She sat on the ground, a small paper cup extended for donations. Her posture spoke of exhaustion and resignation, but when she saw him, her eyes lit up with recognition. Johnny crouched to her level, offering a gentle smile. "Hello again," he said softly. She sat on the ground, a small paper cup extended in front of her for donations. Her posture spoke of exhaustion and resignation. But as Johnny drew near, her eyes lit up with recognition. Johnny crouched down to her level, offering a gentle smile. "Hello again," he said softly. Reaching into his wallet, he pulled out several large bills and placed them in her cup. The girl's eyes widened at the generous donation, and before Johnny could react, she lunged forward, wrapping her arms around his leg. This time, however, the embrace was one of joy rather than fear. "Thank you," she exclaimed, her voice muffled against the fabric of his pants. Then, looking up at him with wonder in her eyes, she asked, "Are you Captain Jack Sparrow? Where's your ship?" Johnny couldn't help but chuckle, the girl's innocence warming his heart despite the sadness of her situation. Slipping into his iconic Jack Sparrow voice, he replied, "Well, love, the black pearl's anchored in a secret cove, waiting for her next adventure. But tell me, what's a brave little pirate like you doing out here all alone?" The girl's smile faltered slightly, and she glanced around nervously before looking back at Johnny. "Captain Jack Sparrow," she whispered, her voice trembling, "please help me." Johnny reached for his wallet again, but the girl shook her head vigorously. "Not money," she said, her eyes pleading. "I need—" Before she could finish, a small crowd began forming around them. Fans who had recognized Johnny called out his name, phones in hand, asking for pictures. The girl flinched, shrinking back as the attention overwhelmed her. The crowd pushed closer, unintentionally jostling Johnny. He instinctively stepped back, shielding the girl as best he could. Thomas, ever watchful, stepped in swiftly. "All right, folks, give him some space," he said firmly, his imposing presence cutting through the commotion. Guiding Johnny with a hand on his shoulder, Thomas opened the limo door and ushered him inside with practiced ease. Once seated, Johnny glanced out the window, his brow furrowed with concern as the girl disappeared into the crowd. "Mr. Depp, I'm sorry, but we should go. Your schedule," Thomas began, his tone firm but polite. Johnny turned away from the window, his expression distant. "Yeah, I heard you," he murmured, his voice unusually soft. His eyes flicked back to the busy street one last time before he straightened in his seat. "I'll be back," he whispered under his breath, a quiet promise meant for the girl. As the limousine eased into traffic, Johnny's phone rang. He answered, confirming his attendance at an upcoming photo shoot. "Yes, everything's on schedule. I'm on my way," he assured the organizer, though his thoughts remained fixed on the girl. After ending the call, he turned to Thomas with a determined look. "We have a few minutes to spare, right?" Thomas checked the time. "About 5 minutes, sir, if we're to stay on schedule." "Then let's go back," Johnny said firmly. "There's something I need to do." The limousine retraced its route, navigating the city streets with practiced efficiency. Johnny's eyes stayed glued to the passing scenery, searching for any sign of the girl. As they approached the spot where he had last seen her, his heart sank. The crowd had dispersed, and she was nowhere to be found. "Pull over here, Thomas," Johnny instructed. "I'll be back in a moment." Stepping out of the car, he entered the convenience store nearby. The bell above the door chimed softly as Johnny walked in. Behind the counter, a teenage cashier, engrossed in a mobile game, barely glanced up. Johnny scanned the aisles systematically, but there was no sign of the girl. Disappointed, he approached the counter. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I'm looking for a little girl, bald, about this tall." He gestured with his hand. Have you seen her? The cashier shook his head, his attention already back on his game. Nah man. Haven't seen any kids in here today. Disheartened, Johnny thanked the cashier and stepped back onto the street. He scanned the nearby alleys and sidewalks, his concern growing with each passing moment. After a few more minutes, he reluctantly returned to the limousine. As the car merged into traffic again, Johnny stared out the window, lost in thought. The quiet hum of the engine filled the space until a soft knock on the glass broke the stillness. Turning slowly, he blinked in surprise. A small face was pressed against the window, tiny hands cupped around her eyes as she peered into the tinted interior. Johnny's heart leapt as he recognized the little girl. Her bald head was unmistakable. Without hesitation, he opened the door and helped her into the back seat just before the light turned green. Inside the limousine, the girl seemed to relax slightly, her wide eyes taking in the plush surroundings. Johnny watched her carefully, noting how she unconsciously rubbed her arms as if cold. "What's your name?" Johnny asked gently. "Sonia," she replied in a small voice. "It's nice to meet you, Sonia," Johnny said warmly. "Now, can you tell me what kind of help you need?" Instead of answering directly, Sonia pointed out the window to a building they were passing. Johnny followed her gesture to a large sign that read orphanage on a rundown structure. Before he could ask further, Sonia pulled up her sleeve, revealing a dark mark on her arm. She then pointed to her bald head and whispered, "Please help, sir." The weight of her plea settled over Johnny. He turned to Thomas, his voice steady but urgent. "Can you park near that orphanage? We need to speak with someone there." "Of course, Mr. Depp," Thomas replied, already changing lanes. As they approached the orphanage, Johnny leaned closer to Sonia. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll figure this out together." Johnny's gaze remained focused on Sonia. He noticed how she seemed to shrink into herself as they neared the building, her earlier courage now giving way to visible apprehension. "It's going to be okay," Johnny reassured her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out together, all right?" Sonia nodded, managing a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The limousine came to a stop in front of the orphanage, and Johnny stepped out to help Sonia. As they approached the entrance, her steps grew slower, more hesitant. The short flight of stairs leading to the front door seemed impossibly daunting. Just as they reached the bottom step, Sonia's legs buckled. Johnny reached out instinctively to catch her, but she was already losing her balance. His grip slowed her fall, but she tumbled the last few steps, landing hard on the pavement. "Sonia!" Johnny cried, rushing to her side. He gently cradled her head, relieved to see she was conscious, though a small cut on her forehead trickled blood. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone to call emergency services. As he explained the situation to the operator, his free hand stayed on Sonia's shoulder, offering comfort and trying to keep her still. She was conscious. Surely that was a good sign, right? But his mind raced with worry, fearing she might have broken a bone in her fragile body. The harsh afternoon sun cast long shadows across her pale face, emphasizing the fear and pain in her eyes. Johnny's heart pounded as he waited for the ambulance, painfully aware of how delicate the young girl before him truly was. As the call with emergency services ended, the front door of the orphanage flew open. An elderly woman with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun hurried out, her face etched with concern. "Oh dear Lord," she exclaimed, making her way down the stairs as quickly as she could manage. "What happened? Is she all right?" Johnny looked up, his hand still resting protectively on Sonia's shoulder. "She collapsed on the stairs," he explained quickly. "I've called for an ambulance." The woman knelt beside them with surprising agility for her age. "I'm Miss Abigail," she introduced herself, her voice steady but full of genuine concern. "I'm the caregiver and owner of the orphanage. We saw what happened on the security cameras, and I came as fast as I could." Her expression softened as she gently brushed Sonia's cheek, her eyes brimming with worry and affection. "Oh, Sonia," she murmured, What have you gotten yourself into this time? Turning back to Johnny, Miss Abigail's face grew somber. Sonia has cancer, she said quietly. Because of her condition, she experiences frequent weakness and imbalance. We've been doing everything we can to manage her care, but... Her voice faltered, and unshed tears glistened in her eyes. Before Johnny could respond, the sound of sirens pierced the air. An ambulance rounded the corner, its lights flashing as it pulled to a stop. 2 paramedics exited swiftly, wheeling a stretcher toward them. As they began assessing Sonia, her small voice broke through the commotion. "Captain Sparrow," she called weakly, reaching for Johnny's hand. "Will you come with me, please?" Johnny's heart clenched at the fear in her voice. He glanced at Miss Abigail, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course, Sonia," he assured her, gently squeezing her hand. "I'll be right there with you." One of the paramedics turned to Johnny apologetically. "I'm sorry, sir, but only one person can ride along, and it should be her guardian." Johnny nodded, then leaned down to speak to Sonia. "Listen, sweetheart," he said softly. "Miss Abigail will ride with you, but I promise I'll meet you at the hospital, okay? My ship will be right behind you." Her lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. "You promise?" "Pirate's honor," Johnny replied with a wink, earning a small, shaky smile from her. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle drove off, Johnny turned to Thomas, who had been waiting nearby. "We're following them to the hospital," he said firmly. Thomas nodded, already moving toward the limousine. "Of course, Mr. Depp. I'll make sure we don't lose sight of them." Settling into the back seat, Johnny watched as the city blurred past. His mind raced with questions about Sonia's condition, her life at the orphanage, and what he could do to help. As Johnny Depp leaned against the nurse's station, the weight of Sonia's situation pressed heavily on him. "I'd like her moved to a private room," he told the nurse, his tone resolute. "And I want her to have the best care, whatever it takes." The nurse nodded, explaining the necessary tests. After a CT scan ruled out a concussion, Sonia was transferred to room 207, where Johnny found himself brainstorming ways to lift her spirit. Rummaging through his limousine, he unearthed a pirate coin and an authentic Jack Sparrow hat, tokens from his Pirates of the Caribbean days. Returning to the hospital, Johnny presented the treasures to Sonia. The hat slipped over her small head, and the golden coin shimmered in her tiny hands. "Captain Sparrow believes in you," he said, slipping into his famous character's voice. "You're the bravest pirate I've ever met." Sonia giggled through her fears, especially when Johnny arranged a surprise movie night featuring his pirate adventures. For a few precious hours, the hospital room transformed into a theater of laughter, camaraderie, and hope. As the movie ended, the night's calm was disrupted by serious news. Sonia was battling stage 3 malignant melanoma. Dr. Marvey outlined an aggressive treatment plan, starting with surgery the next morning. Johnny assured the doctor, "Whatever it costs, she'll get the best care." Before Sonia was wheeled into surgery, Johnny knelt by her side. "Remember, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you face the storm head-on," he said, holding her hand until she drifted into the operating room. Hours later, the doctor returned with cautious optimism. The surgery was successful, but ongoing treatment was critical. Johnny and Miss Abigail exchanged relieved glances, but Johnny's resolve deepened. "I want to set up a fund," Johnny told Miss Abigail later. "Not just for Sonia's care but to renovate the orphanage and provide medical resources for others like her." As Sonia recovered, her orphanage friends visited, wide-eyed at Johnny's presence but more focused on their brave companion. Johnny read pirate stories, filling the room with laughter and hope. For Sonia, the pirate hat and coin became symbols of courage and new beginnings. Johnny realized that this was more than a moment of kindness, it was a new chapter in his life. He had found purpose in creating a brighter future for Sonia and other children, one filled with health, happiness, and adventures worthy of Captain Jack Sparrow.